You're listening to the Stakes in the Six podcast. Here are your co-hosts, Andrew Forbes, Peter Barricchini, and Alex Hobson.
Well, hello, folks, and welcome back to Sticks in the Six, episode 112, brought to you by the folks at Indie Ale House. As always, I'm your host, Andrew Forbes, here with obviously only Peter Barricchini. But Peter, how's it going this week, buddy?
It's going great. Obviously, trying to get by with the weather. I've had a couple of days where, me, how sometimes I deal with like migraines when the weather gets really, really crappy. And I had a really couple of crappy days. So not fun, especially when your head is pounding, it's like just being beaten with a baseball bat or something like that. It was just bad. And even like previously, just the weather right now and like where we are, it's just wow. Just like event after event after event. We had a couple storms and now all of a sudden the deep freeze. Now I hope everyone is just, staying warm because today was not a fun day to go outside.
No, it definitely wasn't. I mean, this is kind of what it's all about living in Canada. Eh? We finally got hit with the big snowstorm. We knew it was coming. We got by January pretty good, but February hits and the snow comes in, and I mean, it's like everybody forgets how to drive up here. So the Great White North, and you get hit with a little snow, and everyone panics. But I mean, like I said, we kind of expected this was going to happen, and a little bit of a late decision here by myself here to go live here tonight too. So we are live on the VSN network, Variety Sports Network. Very excited to be partnered with them as well. As we mentioned a few weeks back, we're going to be sticking with them for a while here, and as they are up and coming with the podcast scene, let's call it. I will mention too, we off the top of the show here, we do have Patrick Dennis Jr. from Not With the Hype podcast. Very, very, very cool podcast. Deals with pop culture, all kinds of societal things, and it's fantastic to have him on. We did talk about the marketability of the NHL and its players, and he had a lot of great stuff to say about it. It was fantastic sitting down and talking with him. Worth noting that will be on our streams once the podcast is released on iHeartRadio and all sorts of things like that. But through the live show tonight, we do not have that interview, so be sure to tune in when we post that podcast as well, that episode. But aside from that, big weekend for the NHL. Big weekend for the NHL. Even if you're not a fan of it, it's the All-Star weekend down in Florida. I'll give you a quick little All-Star story for you. I was writing, well, I still am writing for the Hockey Writers, but I was writing for them back when the game was in Nashville, the John Scott All-Star game. And I posted a little throwback on Twitter today of me interviewing PK Subban, one of the many personalities that was involved in that All-Star game. And I remember it was I got credentials, it was a last minute thing. I drove down 10 hours. I jumped down to Nashville. Within 24 hours, I was doing another 10-hour drive back. But I will say one of the craziest moments for me, and I've covered a couple events for the Hockey Writers, but one of the craziest moments for me was leaving Bridgestone Arena in downtown Nashville, beautiful city. And just following the rest of the media out of the arena and exited through a door, and it led to this red carpet. So I was like, okay, I got my bag on, my hands in my pockets, head down, walking down the red carpet. And, all these kids hanging over the rail, just trying to get autographs. Right. And, you know how it is as a kid, you want to get autographs from these players and whatnot. And
starstruck.
I know I'm not a player. I've got my media credentials on, and I'm just kind of walking down this red carpet. And all of a sudden, this lady out of nowhere just yells, "Sign a fucking autograph, for Christ's sake." And I was looking around, and she's looking at me, and I'm like, I'm not a player. I'm not going to sign the kids jersey or something like that. So, but looking back, man, I would have loved to grab a Sharpie and just sign somebody's jersey. So they had an Andrew Forbes signed jersey.
Hey.
It didn't happen, but great event. And as I mentioned, it was the John Scott All-Star game. It was wild. The media was going crazy over the fact that he was voted in. And I'll tell you what, hell of a speaker at his post-game presser. And, I bet he loved every minute of that. So All-Star weekend for the NHL this weekend. Skills competition going tonight or happened already. Let's jump right into that. I know we got some Leaf talk to come up to as well, but Peter, what's going on with the NHL All-Star skills competition these days?
First things first, I know you told that story about you going to Nashville, but hearing that story about somebody wanted to sign it and get your autograph, I would have been like, I would have just signed it. And then if they try to search you up on like Hockey DB or Elite Prospects, they're going to be disappointed to find nothing. But
played minor house league.
Exactly. They don't have to know what level you play. You just played hockey.
Yeah.
Too funny, but where do I begin with the skills comp? Already from the beginning, like everybody, if you were on social media and you were checking everything out, it was, again, kind of what the NHL is basically, with a crapshoot of the skills comp. From the very beginning, there were a lot of empty seats in the arena. Fans weren't as engaged. The atmosphere wasn't as great. Even the format and the schedule, you're jumping from event to event, and it's just very confusing how we're so used to having one event, having like 6 or 7 or 8 competitors. You get through that event, then you go on to the next one. 6 or 7 competitors, or 6 to 8 competitors, go on, what have you. It was just too much of a mishmash. It looked like everything was done, like the schedule or like the planning of events was done the day of, and they just basically tried to fly by with it. Like, it was just so annoying. It was so hard to try and follow the format, and I really don't know what else to say. I know, there were a couple comments on there saying that, like, I think there were only 2 highlights, really. Sarah Nurse pulling off the Peter Forsberg in that shootout. That, I think, saved the Tendy tandem, because at that point, the Tendy tandem event was not that great. But then the splash shot event was kind of cool. I will say that, where you're using the surfboards as the targets, and then you get in and then you shoot the puck at the dunk tank and the player goes in. That was kind of fun.
Was that the pre-recorded event?
That was the pre-recorded event, yeah. But I have one gripe about that. There were times where you had to shoot 2 or 3 pucks at the surfboard, and it made it seem like you were actually playing a game at like one of those traveling circuses or carnivals, where it seems fixed that you're hitting it and it's not going down. That was my only gripe, but it was still a fun event. So outside of those 2 things, it was kind of cool. Mitch Marner dressed up as a guy from Miami Vice. David Pastrnak was imitating Happy Gilmore with the golf. So you know what, kind of like some pop culture references there. But other than that, again, like another lackluster skills competition. Last year was probably the best one, where we had with the shootout, where Trevor Zegras is going full on dodgeball. But yeah, I was actually hoping that they would try and take some clips from previous skills comp and add it into this one, because it was just boring.
Did you see Zegras's tweet after the skills competition?
Oh, with the yawn with the sleeping emoji? Yeah.
Kind of how everybody was feeling. And I was going to say to you, I think empty seats in Florida is not really a new story. It's kind of been the story for the Panthers for a long time, but
been there, done that.
We talked about this with Alex a couple weeks back, and when we talked about Nylander and whether he should be in the NHL, the All-Star game, and the NHL All-Star weekend it's not just the game, it's not just the 3-on-3 competition. The whole weekend has become more of just kind of an embarrassing mark on the NHL, in my opinion. And to all those people that have a different opinion, by all means, I support you in having that opinion. For me, myself, like I don't sit here and look forward to watching what's going on. I like to see a little bit of competition. I like to see, hey, we're going to bump and we're going to grind and we're going to, throw the body around a little bit in the games and stuff like that. Like, I want there to be a competition, and not just, this is a fun skate around. And I feel like you're going to a public skate with a hockey stick and you're just kind of skating around the people that are there without sticks. That's what I feel like this whole weekend's about it now. And, it's become more of a performance than it is hockey.
Yeah.
And for me, like, I'm at the point where I'd rather have no All-Star break. I'd rather have, maybe a quick,
International
maybe
tournament.
everybody gets a weekend off to go down to Maui or whatever you want to do and do your thing, but not like an All-Star weekend. I'd rather have you just name the NHL's first All-Star team, the NHL's second All-Star team, the NHL's all-rookie team. I'm okay with that. And I think it'd be more credible than what we're seeing in Florida this weekend. But again, that's my opinion.
Even
Quick shout
so,
out,
I just want to say one more quick
here.
thing.
I'm just going to show you a quick comment here from longtime listener Josh Brownlee. Keep up the good work on the podcast, boys. Thank you very much, Josh.
Thanks, Josh. Appreciate
Josh
it.
made it out to one of our live shows in Toronto at the Bottom Line as well. So appreciate it, Josh, and keep listening, buddy. We can we can use all the listens we get, and probably got more compliments here from Josh than the All-Star game's going to get this weekend. But go ahead with what you had to say there, Peter.
Yeah. Even like I remember like in the past, because so they did the faster skater event and they did like the whole players going at it one another. And then they got the final two, and then they had to take a break, and then they went with the final run between Kevin Fiala and Andrei Svechnikov. I remember, like you said, you wanted to be a bit of a competition. When you had 6, 7, 8 players doing that event, it's always like, one lap around, and it's always like whoever has the top one gets to remain in first, whoever doesn't. And that's where the competition was. That's what made it exciting, because, okay, he has the best time. What's this next player going to do? Is he going to beat it? Is he not? And then at the end, you save kind of like the best for last. And then it's like a last minute ditch effort to try and, bump somebody down with the last skater. It didn't have that feel. It was just like, okay, you're going to go top two, done, whatever. Seemed kind of basic. It kind of felt like they were playing like doing the home run derby where they had that break in between. And it's like, I can understand in baseball because, these guys are hitting like 20, 30 home runs in like the span of like, 4.5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
You're just doing one lap around for like 12, 13 seconds. That should be enough. And that competition is what makes it best. And I that's where I'm just going to end it right there, because just the whole entire event, I'm going to be repeating myself. It's lackluster. It was boring, and there's just not enough marketability with even the top players. We will get to that quite a bit with our interview with Patrick, but it just seems there was no presence or mindset from anything. Like it was just like, I really don't know what to say anymore.
Yeah, and I mean we can beat this till till the end of time here, but I think they got to figure out a way to change things. And I think the biggest story right now out of All-Star Weekend is Sidney Crosby saying that the NHL needs to go back to 1 versus 8 in the playoffs.
Thank you.
That might be the biggest headline right now coming out of Florida. And I know you agree. I know I agree. It would set up a great, because right now you've got the 4th best record in the league in Toronto, going to end up going against the 5th best record in the league in Tampa Bay, and one of them is going to be out in the first round.
Yeah.
Or sorry, the 3rd best, whatever. It doesn't matter. Regardless, you're going to have two of your top teams in the East going head to head in the first round. And that's not what the playoffs is about. The playoffs is about rewarding the teams that do well in the regular season. Hence what Sidney Crosby had to say at All-Star Weekend. And again, we can see how the games might go tomorrow. I still think that the biggest storyline might be Sidney Crosby basically
playoff
saying
format.
That, Gary, let's get our head on straight here.
Even Rachel Dory, even she commented on that, saying that even after every single round, do the reseeding like you did at the World Juniors, where the top team still seeds, and then you have the second, third, and then move everybody up. That to me would be a little bit more entertaining.
Yeah, I mean they got to find a way to do it, because right now we talked about it with Patrick, actually, like the ratings being down 22% in the US. You got to find a way to make it a marketable game where people stay interested, even in cities where maybe their team isn't as competitive, in creating more rivalries, because the rivalries that you were looking to create and doing what you did divisionally, they're not there. Obviously, you got the Toronto and the Boston, but you have the same teams every year making the playoffs and going against the same teams in the first round. by the time teams get to, the second, third, fourth round, they're not, it's not the same competitive level because you've got injuries that you're dealing with. You've got tired teams. You've got there's all these things that come into play with it as well. So like I said, I think when it comes down to it, when All-Star Weekend's all said and done, you're gonna have a discussion about what the biggest storylines are, and I can tell you right now, I think Crosby's saying that is gonna be one of them. In saying that, one of Gary Bettman's big things was having every team represented at All-Star Weekend. We have a guy in Bo Horvat traded right before All-Star Weekend. Now a member of the New York Islanders, still representing the Pacific Division. Your thoughts on that, but also your thoughts on the Bo Horvat trade in general. What Vancouver got, what New York got in what was one of Toronto's targets in Bo Horvat.
Yeah, again, Canucks still made a big mistake letting Horvat go and re-signing JT Miller because, again, this is a guy that's been with the organization for so long, and now all of a sudden he's kind of like the odd man out, your captain, so to speak. That just seems like a kick in the gut for him, considering how the season has gone, how there's so many like controversies surrounding the organization. But like you said, we're here to talk about the actual trade itself, and it was a bit of a shocker because no one expected the Islanders to come up out of nowhere and give the deal that they did. And on the surface, it may seem like an underwhelming return for Vancouver, considering the fact that the 2023 first is top 12 pick protected. I don't understand why they would agree to that. But then considering how bare the Islanders prospect or, draft capital is, I can understand why they wanted to hang on to it. But if I'm Vancouver, I would still want that because you haven't had first in God knows how long. Aside from Lekaramaki before, you gave up your first for Oliver Ekman-Larsson in exchange for Dylan Guenther, basically. So that was a big miss. But getting Aatu Räty is a very underrated move, considering how he was supposed to be the first overall pick, basically, in the 2021 draft. So the fact that, he fell down to the New York Islanders, didn't quite have the best draft season, but he's been able to pick it up, and he's been able to find his game, find the goal scoring ability, find the power forward game that made him so special as a prospect. That could be a big difference maker. And the fact that they gave up, a centerman that's in his prime right now, realistically, you would like to keep him, but you got a promising young centerman in Aatu Räty that can be of a significant impact down the line as your second line center at best. Even if he doesn't reach his true potential, he would still be a very decent third round or third line center, but top six is his top potential. So having him in there, I think there's still a lot of untapped potential with Anthony Beauvillier. Great skill set, great shot, great, work ethic and energy. I just think there were times he was just a little bit off with the Islanders. So I think maybe going to Vancouver would be a fresh start for him. Overall, it worked out for both sides. Islanders got a relatively decent play, or not a relatively decent player, but a really great player in Bo Horvat, and it's going to look even better if they're able to resign him. Nothing at the moment yet, but Vancouver got young players in return in Beauvillier and especially Räty. I think he's going to be the main center or the main focus of this team down the line. But yeah, on the surface, I could understand why there were like a lot of head scratching or whatever, but looking deeper, it is a good return for the Canucks. Great ad for the Islanders. So all around wins for everybody.
Yeah, I'm gonna say this. I think there's two ways to look at this trade right now. And the way I'm looking at it is if the Islanders are able to re-sign Bo Horvat, I truly believe that they win this trade.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not convinced that Beauvillier is going to be turn into what the Canucks expect him to be. I think his ceiling is only so high. And for him to be kind of that centerpiece, I get there's a lot of excitement in what Aatu Räty can bring. That said, we've seen the highs and the lows of this prospect. And I'm not convinced that, the lows aren't going to be there when he goes to Vancouver as well. Like you said, he was supposed to be a top prospect in his draft class. That fell off a little bit with his play in his draft year. There was a lot of question marks as to whether he was the same player that, he had originally been scouted as. And that's gonna kind of be in the back of the minds of a lot of people, and especially Vancouver fans as well, wondering, we traded our captain for these two main assets. And as you mentioned, the pick itself is top 12 protected. So
could have had two top 15 picks possibly.
Exactly. And that's why I wonder, I said to somebody, a colleague of mine, that I believe the way I look at it is I think Vancouver rushed the trade. I think they knew they weren't going to get a deal done with Bo Horvat. Lou swoops in and throws this offer at them. And, a young player in Beauvillier, an even younger, still considered a prospect in my mind in Ratty. And then, of course, the first round pick looks juicy, even though it's outside the top 12. It looked like a juicy trade, and I think Alvin bit a little bit too early. I think he could have gotten a better deal done heading into the deadline with a team that was looking to add a piece like Bo Horvat, because right now, let's be honest, goal wise, he's having a career year. Is he going to be due for a nice little pay increase? Absolutely, but what he brings to the room, what he brings as a leader, I don't think you can replace that with what they got. And that's why I'm saying, like, if New York re-signs Bo Horvat, they win the trade. No questions asked. If he walks at the end of this year, then absolutely Vancouver looks like genial in what they've done. So there, for me right now, there's two ways to look at it. I think this is going to be a trade that we look back on, in a year's time and say, okay, this is how it turned out. If he re-signs, maybe we look back on it in 5 years and say, well, Vancouver, this was the start of their complete overhaul. But at the end of the day, the three of us sat here last week and mentioned how trading Bo Horvat was probably the worst idea they could have had. Not having the room within their cap to hold on to your captain and holding on to a guy like, JT Miller. It's definitely one of those things where you're raising a lot of question marks. So I think losing a guy like Horvat in the room is a big loss for a team like Vancouver, especially because right now they look like they're in turmoil. I don't know what else to say. Like I've got family that are in Vancouver that are fans of this team. And I'm telling you right now, like, that team is in turmoil. You're not going to be making the playoffs this year. You're probably not going to be making the playoffs next year. You've started basically another rebuild after having done a rebuild, after maybe one of the most horrendous contracts in Roberto Luongo and not building a team around him. So sucks to be a Vancouver Canucks fan right now, but at the same time, I hope for Horvat that he excels in New York and gets an opportunity to make a playoff run, because, having watched him in London, he certainly deserves that kind of credit, and what he's brought to the Vancouver Canucks. I think he deserved to be treated a little bit better than he was, in terms of, finding him a home in Vancouver. So, that said, like we mentioned off the top of the show, if you're listening on our streams, we will obviously throw to Patrick Dennis Jr. from Not With the Hype podcast to talk marketability in the NHL and with its players. Right now, that interview is brought to you by the folks at Indie Ale House. As always, hockey is back, and with it, so are our Maple Leafs. Getting ready for a night out or watching the game at home with the gang, what better way to do it than with a nice cold one from the folks at Indie Ale House in Toronto. With 2 locations in the city at Italy, Toronto at Bay and Bloor, the Bureauteca location. They have 2 big screens, amazing, authentic Italian food, and loads of beer. Also at OG Brew Pub in the Junction at Keele and Dundas with 120 seats, famous bar food, and 12 taps. Indie Ale House is an award-winning brewery featuring their flagship Instigator IPA and dozens of rotating monthly special release beers, perfect for takeout, dine-in, or bottle shop online orders when planning for game night. You can find Instigator IPA or the beautiful Marco Polo Pilsner that I have right here with me at finer LCBOs across the province as well. Hashtag Live Indie is the motto. Adventurous, fun-focused beers with a selection for everyone from a healthy dose of in-your-face hoppy beers. For the beer geeks to mainstream pilsners and easy drinking options, Indie Ale House is the go-to for game day. Visit www.indiealehouse.com to place your orders today. And with that, we are jumping over to our Maple Leaf talk. And obviously, we're going to talk a little deadline as we head into the March 3rd deadline. One target, as we said, Bo Horvat off the table. I don't see the New York Islanders trading an asset like that now that they've got him. So we'll take him off our table as well. But I want to get your insight on what the Leafs need to do at the deadline. Are we talking about making that big splash, going after the big name like Timo Meier? Or are we talking about like little deals like the Giordano move that we saw that brought him in and really changed the direction of how Liljegren's development was happening just a season ago? Are the Leafs going to be big buyers at the deadline? What are your thoughts, Peter?
Well, as we've talked about many times before, me, you, Alex, we have no idea what Kyle Dubas would be doing. And I think it was also Mark Shag who wrote a great piece about the Maple Leafs, how they may surprise a lot of people about what their plans are, because there's a lot of unpredictability. And I mean by that is you think they're going after one player, but then they go after someone completely different. And that's probably what's going to happen because, we knew that they were in on Giordano last year. I think this time it might be a little bit different, and they're holding their cards close to their chest right now.
Insider, baby. Insider.
Exactly. You got it. You got that insider information. That's the main thing. But yeah, I think you're gonna ideally you would like to try and get a top six forward, but with Horvat gone, and if that's going to be the market set for that for a top six player, then the Maple Leafs can top that because they have, B/A rated prospects. They have roster pieces that they can send off in a trade as well. I know they want to hang on to their first this year, but if they're able to even move the 2024 first round pick, I think that might be more within their range of trying to move on from a pick because this year's draft is very deep. But yeah, it all depends on who they're going after. And I think if any cost is involving Matthew Knies, unless you're getting a top tier player with a contract or with term, I don't think you're moving Knies because he's looking fantastic in the NCAA. You're looking at moving possibly Fraser Minton, Topi Niemela as a prospect, maybe Nick Robertson, but at the same time, he's dealing with his injuries. Is the team really going to take him on? I think you try to get deals done where you have those like middle six players where you can move them up and down the lineup that have a bit more impact. And I mean by that is, what we're seeing with Kerfoot, Alexander Kerfoot, Pierre Engvall, they have their moments in certain games, but then they fall off right after that for like a good stretch. So they don't have that consistency. If you're able to find some players with consistency that is more within their wheelhouse where they could trade B-level prospects, roster players, and still trade mid to late round picks, I think that would be more ideal, kind of like the Giordano move. But at the same time, it's very, very up in the air of what they're going to do. They can go big. They have assets to do it. It's just, will they make it work? Because they're so tight to the cap, and would they rather go for like players with a cheaper contract that still have high upside and can still play with their defensive mindset, added physical play, try and be a bit more competitive? I think that's more of the direction that they should go right now.
Yeah, I want to get your opinion too on Matthew Knies because there's a lot of conversation. I know, I think it was you or Alex engaged with somebody on Twitter in terms of, the untouchability of Matthew Knies. And, you talk about his year so far at the in the NCAA at the University of Minnesota, and this kid's putting on a show. So last year, a point per game, 15 goals, 33 points in 33 games, and this season, 17 goals, 30 points in 28 games. The this is one of their top prospects when it comes to big physical, a guy that can put the puck in the net and really, in my opinion, you hear about how Kyle Dubas says their first round pick this year is untouchable. Well, to me, Matthew Knies might be your most untouchable prospect.
Yeah, and I know the comment you're referring to, and they were talking about his production too. How it doesn't seem like it's jumping off the page like you're seeing with Jimmy Snuggerud or even Logan Cooley, who are 1-2 or they're ahead of Knies in their team scoring. And I said, you know what? Yeah, production is important, but you got to look past that. What is he doing that's making him succeed right now? And what makes Matthew Knies so successful is the ability to use his size to his advantage, playing that power forward game, coming out of the corners with quick speed. He wanted to improve on that aspect, and he has. He's got a much smoother stride this time around. And even so, this is a player that can, play in all situations. Power play, he's played on penalty kill in the past. So this is a player who's not just being an offensive threat, but he's being very responsible. He has the smarts. He has the awareness. He has the ability to locate his teammates. His head is always up. He's always assessing the situation perfectly. And I think that's what you want to see for a player that's able to make the jump from the NCAA to the NHL. And everyone is saying, oh, call it collegiate is different from the NHL. Yeah, we get that. We understand that. We're not trying to overhype him, but he is showing promise that he can make the jump and start to succeed at the next level.
Oh, I'm going to 100% overhype him. I mean, we're Toronto, we're a Leafs podcast, and
that's true, what we're all
is overhyping everything when it comes to the NHL. When it's another team's fan base, it's always about Toronto.
We're the center of the hockey universe.
That's right. We're going to overhype everything that we can. So, I agree with you. I think right now, yeah, of course you can't compare the NCAA to the NHL, but I mean, when you have a guy that's excelling the way that he is at the NCAA, you don't want to look past that either. And we've seen the NCAA over the last number of years, as well as the USHL, become a breeding ground for NHL talent. And it's not the same NCAA that we would have been talking about even 5 years ago. Now this is a league that we see a lot of players go to developmentally, not only for school, but as well for getting an opportunity to kind of play a little bit more hockey at their level so that they are ready to make that jump to the NHL. And I think, to see what Matthew Knies is doing for Minnesota, you can't overlook that. And, the comments to say like, his production isn't where it needs to be. I mean, it's like saying Nylander is the worst player because he holds up on hits. It's a conversation we don't even need to have at this point.
Shouldn't.
But
yep.
Here's the way I look at it is if you have the right deal in place and the make or break is Matthew Knies, and you are in a position to go on a very, very strong cup run, then yes, you consider trading a guy like Matthew Knies. At this point, the Leafs aren't there. And could they go on a run this year? Absolutely. And I'm not saying they can't. I'm saying they have not made it past the first round in how many years? To sit here and speculate that, yeah, you know what, we're one left wing and one right defenseman away from making a cup run. I'm not convinced. To say that you need to trade Matthew Knies because this is the end all and be all of the Maple Leafs future and they need to win now. No, you're not in a win now. People are saying that in thinking that, Matthews is gone at the end of his contract, Nylander's gone at the end of his contract. There's no hard fact saying that either of those statements are true.
Yeah.
Right. You've got Riley signed to long-term. Marner's going to be up in a little bit. My guess is he wants to stay in Toronto. Michael Bunting, as much as I'd love to keep him, if he does go somewhere else, he is replaceable. We've seen that. We've seen Hyman was replaceable. Bunting is replaceable. There are players within that lineup that are replaceable. This is not a win now. You still have to have, potential in the cupboard for when it comes to your future and your prospects and making sure that you set this team up for success. If you're a team like Vancouver, where you're going through the ringer and trying to find young guys to come in and change the culture of that team, you don't want that in Toronto. No. We've seen that happen in Toronto. And how well did that go? How many people had to throw their jerseys on the ice that season?
Throw waffles too.
Waffles, waffles, jerseys. That's what we do in Toronto. Maple syrup, but that's not what, you don't want to get to that point again. So you don't want to sacrifice your entire future to maybe get to the third round. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. One more point. Those that would be willing to trade Matthew Knies for just about anybody, if you trade Matthew Knies and the trade doesn't work out and the team is good and he's going to thrive no matter where he goes, you are going to be the same person that complains that we traded Matthew Knies and the trade didn't work out, even though you wanted to trade him. So I ask you this. This is a player that I'm not trying to put like an enormous amount of pressure on him to come in and be a middle six forward that can have an impact in the playoffs. But what if he does come in? Because I know it's not likely to happen, but what if he does succeed? What if he does play his heart out? What if he does live up to the hype or live up to the expectations that the team has of him? And he is a critical piece in the first round. And if everything goes well, what if that continues on? He has a lot of potential. You just can't give up on that. Same thing with Nick Robertson. I think right now it's a different situation because he's always injured, but he is a dynamic goal scorer. He has shown that. You just can't give up on that.
Well, and I mean, you have to assume that the Leafs are going to get some injuries down the stretch, and they might need a guy to step in once his season's done in the NCAA.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, let's not sit here and pretend that the Leafs haven't had issues with injuries all season long. That's going to likely happen again at some point down the road, and they might need that piece. And you no longer have Nick Robertson to step into that role. So now you have maybe a guy that had a point per game season in the NCAA that can come up and step into that role. And I mean, you have to try and salvage your future as well. And that's my biggest thing is salvage your future. You know what I'm going to do, Peter, is I'm going to start taking screenshots of every little bit of Matthew Knies hate speech that I see over the next little bit. And in 3 years, when he's a top 5 scorer on this team, we're going to sit down and have the same conversation. And I'm going to roll a little banner across the bottom here of all the hate speech that I
put them all up on the screen
with the usernames of every single person that released it.
Man.
Stay tuned for Sticks in the Six, episode 354
Cold
in
takes.
a couple of years. But no, I think for me, going back to the question, I think the Leafs need to make the right moves for them. And I don't think they're at the point where they go after. I know everybody wants Timo Meier. I know they want Timo Meier.
Or Jacob Chychrun.
I would love either one of them. I wouldn't be surprised if the Leafs go after somebody like a James Van Riemsdyk, somebody like a
Travis Konechny.
Even that might be a little bit of a stretch for what they are willing to give up. I think they really have to look at what they have and consider is this the final straw to getting to the Stanley Cup final. And right now I have to see consistency in their play, and I haven't seen that. We've seen them play down to the lower teams in the standings, and if that's going to continue to be the case, you're not ready to make that big splash at the trade deadline to go all in. That's where my head's at.
I think that those 5 games against Columbus, Montreal, and Chicago, I think that would be, if they're able to go 5-0 during that stretch, maybe 4-1 because one of them is going to be back-to-back. You got to see what you can do because all those 3 teams are below in the standings, and you don't want a repeat of what we saw weeks ago with Toronto versus Montreal against Ottawa, because those are valuable points gone, and those are teams that you should be winning against no matter what.
These next 2 weeks are going to be big for them, and they're without Matthew. So I mean, this is a real test for them, and I'm going to throw one more name out there again. I threw it out a few weeks ago when I wrote the piece of why Dubas was seeing the Arizona game. Lawson Krause is a guy that I truly believe he's a guy that kind of fits the mold of a big body physical being that can fit into the Wayne Simmons type of role if you take on like the big bad Bruins in the playoffs, but he can also tuck, and that's going to be the biggest thing. And he's not to the same level of Tom Wilson, but he's on the verge of being that Tom Wilson type of guy where he can put up 15, 20 goals and still be a physical presence in the lineup. I think he's a perfect left winger for that second line. I'm throwing that name out there. If somehow he finds his way to Toronto, I'm calling myself the insider once again.
Kind of a little bit of a spoiler alert for me. I know like there were like, target pieces for the St. Louis Blues that, Shane Cini and Spencer Lazare have talked about. They talked about Ivan Barbashev and Noel Chari. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't be surprised. Jeremy Rutherford came out saying that they could be had for like for a second, third, fourth round pick, what have you, or a second and third, possibly a fourth if they don't have that third. They could be had for mid-round picks or B-level prospects, I think. If you can manage that for two players that could play physical and chip in with goals, that could be huge. That could be a big addition. And you're not giving up a whole lot because you're giving up pieces that can be easily replaced.
Yeah, no, and that's what they need to do. They need to find ways of getting those pieces to replace what they need for those cheaper prices. In saying that, after I've shut down the Timo Meier idea, what do you think the price is for a guy like Timo Meier? And do you think the Leafs do have a way of making it work for him?
Yeah, it's funny you brought that up because Shang Peng from San Jose Hockey or SJ Hockey now came up with, the potential, or like there's an outside source that said what the potential asking price is. It's a first rounder and a grade 1 prospect, which you're probably looking at 2023 and Matthew Nice if that's the case, or 2 great B graded prospects, one good prospect and a young established NHLer. So I think if that's the latter half that you go through, if you can trade a, Nick Abruzzese or even a Ronnie Hirvonen, or even if you need to throw in Fraser Minton, 2 out of those 3 players, that can be had. Plus, there's also the fact that, you could throw in a good prospect, or those 2 are already decent prospects as well. Topi Niemela, right-handed shot defender, an established NHL player that's also young. That can be had. And if you get to keep Matthew Nice in your first and you go for that latter option, that could be a potential starting point in my view, because if you're giving up mid-tier prospects plus a well-established young talent in the NHL right now, if you get to keep your first and Nice, I think that's the way you go.
Yeah, I mean, if you can find a way to get it done and that you're going to lock up Timo Meier, the biggest problem right now is if you go after Timo Meier, you've got big contracts in Matthews, Nylander, Marner all coming off the books in the next couple of years. He's
asking for $9 million possibly.
So
and his qualifying offer is $10 million. So you're in tough.
Yeah, and that's kind of the aspect of that trade that I'm looking at. I'm like, it doesn't make sense for the Maple Leafs. As much as it'd be nice to get him in there, it to me, you're giving up too much of your future for a guy that will be there for the remainder of his contract and then he's gone. I'm not willing to go that route, knowing what we've done in the past with the Foligno trade, giving up the first round pick, and albeit in a bit of a weaker draft. But yeah, I don't know. I don't see the Leafs making that big move. I truly believe that the Leafs are going to make a couple of smaller deals. Maybe they find a way to get Simmons on a team where he's going to play a little bit more. Get some smaller pieces that add a little bit of depth to the lineup. I don't see Timo Meier being that piece, and he would look great in blue and white, but yeah, it's too big of a cost, and moving forward contractually, it doesn't make sense. But again, that's just my opinion. I'm not an insider. I'm not Bob McKenzie. I'm not, any of those guys. But I'm just looking at it from the outside perspective, armchair GM, and I don't see that being a reality for the Maple Leafs.
Agreed.
Leafs making the deadline work for versus the Bruins in Tampa. So that's going to be the biggest question mark, right? Obviously, the Bruins, they're the hierarchy of this NHL season, right? They're the ones at the top of the Eastern Conference. They're at the top of the overall standings. The Leafs need to find a way to have a better deadline than the two teams that they're going to see likely in the first two rounds. Now we know Bo Horvat obviously not going to the Bruins anymore. That was a little bit, there was some speculation there as well as some speculation that, Horvat might come to the Leafs. So that one's off the table. Seems like Tampa Bay always finds a way to make the deadline interesting for themselves. Last year they got Brandon Hagel leading up to the deadline. And again, went on a great run to the Stanley Cup final. Your thoughts on the Leafs if they can outduel the Bruins and the Lightning going into the deadline?
Yeah, and the big thing that we've been talking about lately is draft capital prospects. The Boston Bruins, if they were in on Bo Horvat, chances are they would have to give up Fabian Lysell. And if they were willing to do it, they would have got on the phone and say, yeah, we're doing this right now. They are not giving up Lysell because their prospect system is absolutely bare.
It's awful.
Yeah, they're probably one of the weakest in my eyes. And they do have some good names. They do have Brett Harrison. They have Mason Lohrei. They have some quality names in their system. But if you were to move them in a trade, it's not going to be enough to bring in a top tier name unless it's just Lysell. So that to me is one reason why Boston would probably be going for depth players or role players as opposed to going for like a top six. Same thing with Tampa Bay. Looking at their prospect system, they got Isaac Howard. They have, Jack Thompson. They have Jack Finley. They got good names, but they don't have ones that, because they basically gave everything up after that Brandon Hagel trade. They gave up their top prospects essentially in that deal. So it's kind of the same situation as the Bruins. They don't have a deep enough prospect system to try and move prospects. They have late round picks that could be of use to them, but that's still not enough because at most they have a second in 2024. And this year they don't have a pick until the third round, fourth round. Same thing with the Bruins too. I mean, they got to pick in every single round, but I think they're going to hold on to them because I think they know how bare their prospect system is to try and make the most of those picks. They can move their first, they can move their third, but they probably made their last big transaction by getting Hampus Lindholm last year as well. So they'll make deals. They'll make good, solid depth deals because that's what they do. They got a good scouting departments, both teams, but I don't think they're going to get in a big or the top name like they did last year.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, like you said, it's going to come down to which one can make the best depth deal. Obviously, Tampa's had a knack for building up that third line, which is what ultimately won them 2 Stanley Cups. And Boston's Boston. They're going to have that top 3 line. They got Hall as one of their depth players. They're going to be the same tough Bruins that we've had to play against for the last, 4 or 5 years. Right. But it's going to come down to, the Leafs and Dubas finding a way to make that kind of small deal that ends up being a big piece heading into the playoffs. And realistically, like I said, you want to find a cheap option. You want to find like a Michael Bunting where you can add a piece to the lineup for cheap and he comes in and gets something done. And maybe it comes down to goaltending. We don't know the health of Matt Murray and where he's at with his ankle. But it's going to be an interesting deadline leading into this last month before the March 3rd NHL deadline. And it's definitely something that we'll continue to talk about on a weekly basis for sure. But yeah, the Leafs need to find a way to outduel these two teams ahead of them, because until Gary decides to go back to that 1-8 playoff, these are the two teams that we're likely going to be seeing in the first couple of rounds here, and the Leafs have to find a way to try and get it done on that side of it. But
listen to Sid, Gary.
Listen to Sid. I mean, he's
he's been the face of the NHL for years.
Face of the NHL.
Exactly.
It's exactly what we talked about with Patrick Dennis Jr. here on this episode. But Peter, before we shut it down here, a couple quick notes. Dylan Strome signed a 5-year extension with the Washington Capitals. Good for him. I mean, we saw Mark Shag talk about it. He's been kind of, sticking to it after he got drafted 3rd overall and just didn't really work out. He's found a way. He's found a home in Washington, and now, collects on that bag. And I would be remiss if we didn't mention Bobby Hall passing at the age of 84. Obviously, a lot of controversy on the Twitterverse about Bobby Hall as a person. And I saw the perfect tweet. You can't celebrate him as a player without recognizing what kind of person he was away from the game.
Yep.
And so with that, I will leave it there and say, obviously our thoughts are with his family at this time. It's obviously a tough thing to go through. That being said, you have to look at all aspects of a person, not just the player they were on the ice as well, to rightfully celebrate or not celebrate who they are with their passing. So that being said, Peter, before we shut it down here, our live show here tonight, episode 112 of Sticks in the Six, anything you got for us coming up this week?
Yeah, I mentioned it. I gave it a little spoiler alert. Got something about how the Leafs can try and acquire Barbashev and Achari, as opposed to maybe Ryan O'Reilly, who might be a little bit of a heftier price tag, may still want to stay in St. Louis. So they have options there as well. So be on the lookout for that.
All right, I will be. I got a piece coming out about why Dubas was in Kitchener, looking after the Kitchener Rangers. So that should be a fun one. Something we can look at heading into the June draft.
I was about to say, I already gave you my guesses. So
yeah, there you go. You go. With that, obviously, we missed Alex this week. We'll be happy to welcome him back next week. Big shout out to Patrick Dennis Jr. from Not With the Hype podcast. Be sure to check out his podcast. Be sure to check out our episode when we release it on all the streaming networks, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you download your podcast. Make sure you head over there and download. Help us out. Help us continue to push this fantastic show. And a big shout out to the folks at Indie Ale House and Variety Sports Network as they continue to partner with the Sticks in the Six podcast. With that, that's it for Peter and myself this week for episode 112 of Sticks in the Six. Be sure to follow us all on Twitter at Andrew G. Forbes, at A. Hobson Media, and at P. Barricini. You can also follow the show at Sticks in the Six Pod. That's STIXINTHE 6IXPOD. Until next week, episode 113. That's all we got. Thanks for tuning in, and be sure to check us out on all of our streams.